Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tricia Paik, Florence Finch Abbott Director of the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum. My pronouns are she, hers. We're so pleased that you all joined us today for this very special event, Buscando Futuro, Finding Future, featuring artist Hector Dionicio Mendoza in conversation with David Hernández, Associate Professor of Latina and Latino Studies. We would like to begin this event by acknowledging that those of us here in Western Massachusetts are occupying the land once resided upon by the Nonotuck people. I'm truly pleased to welcome you to the museum's first public event during this remote time. So thank you to the incredible Mount Holyoke community, students, faculty, staff, and alums who are joining us today, as well as our broader audiences out there in Zoom land. This special program was conceived to celebrate Latinx Heritage Month, and it is only possible because of key collaborations across the college. And for that, I want to thank our co-sponsors of this event: Office of Community and Inclusion, Office of the Dean of Faculty, the Miller-Worley Center for the Environment, Department of Spanish, Latin American, and Latino Studies, and the Departments of Studio Art and Art History. What an amazing collaboration. Now I'm pleased to pass things over to Ellen Alvord, the museum's Associate Director for Engagement and Weatherby Curator of Academic Programs. Ellen?
Thank you, Tricia. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tricia mentioned, my name is Ellen Alvord, and I use she, her pronouns. In my role as the museum's Associate Director of Engagement and Weatherby Curator of Academic Programs, it is my great privilege to work closely with Mount Holyoke faculty in support of the museum's teaching mission. In recent years, the museum has sought to bring new works into the collection that speak to the most pressing issues in our world today, as well as the diversity of student lived experiences and the cutting-edge scholarship of our faculty. Last year, my wonderful colleague, Associate Curator Stephanie Sparling-Williams, and I had the distinct pleasure of working with a remarkable group of faculty from across academic disciplines. These faculty members recommended artwork that would make a meaningful and lasting impact on the ways that we teach with our collection. One of those faculty members was Associate Professor of Latina and Latino Studies, David Hernández, who brought to our attention the extraordinary and powerful art of Hector Dionicio Mendoza, and for this we are deeply grateful. Professor Hernández has been teaching at Mount Holyoke since 2012 and is currently the Faculty Director of Community-Based Learning. He received his doctorate in Comparative Ethnic Studies from UC Berkeley, and his research focuses on immigration enforcement, and in particular, the US detention regime. He is widely published and teaches important courses on the politics of inequity, the visualizing of immigrant narratives, and the history of deportation. We are delighted to have Professor David Hernández serve as the host for today's program. David, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Tricia. Welcome viewers to our public event. I would like to thank personally the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum, in particular Tricia Paik, Ellen Alvord, and Stephanie Sparling-Williams, whose leadership and collaboration make all of this possible. I am pleased to welcome all of you watching and our esteemed guest, artist Hector Dionicio Mendoza, a brilliant public artist, sculptor, and art professor. I am thankful for his time with us today. This is a special event for the college, taking place in obviously challenging times. Today's event celebrates the acquisition of two of Mendoza's artworks, the first, Mariposa/Butterfly, and the second, Immigrant Shoes, which we will show you shortly. The acquisitions reflect the continued vibrancy of the art museum, but also its future directions. Now, this is a recorded event, so if you are watching this in the future or plan to, I hope we've turned the corner on COVID-19 and have moved toward a better, healthier place, having learned lessons about new and old ways of doing things that are more safe and equitable. Hector Dionicio Mendoza is an active practitioner and art professor at California State University, Monterey Bay. Mendoza has produced multi-layered, politically engaged art from the outset of his career, developing new techniques and working within the constraints of our shifting political world and a planet undergoing climate change. I want to use our time to engage in discussion, so I will keep my recitation of his biography brief. Mendoza was born in Uruapan, Mexico, in the state of Michoacan. He practiced art before, during, and after his formal training at the California College of the Arts in Oakland, California, and Yale University, where he earned his MFA. Based in California, Mendoza has shown globally and throughout the nation as well. He has developed many of his own processes with found and recycled materials, as well as using indigenous materials of the border region like plants, earth, and even tortillas, thus transforming natural and everyday materials into more complex forms rich for teaching and highly durable. The pieces you will see here today were acquired through a year-long effort among faculty of color and museum staff dedicated to diversifying the museum's holdings in order to support our curriculum and provide students and faculty, as well as the local community, the opportunity to engage more deeply with one of the college's most important resources, the Art Museum. Mendoza's art is reflective of this thoughtful, collaborative process in which museum professionals Ellen Alvord and Stephanie Sparling-Williams guided faculty through acquisitions, shipment, storage, and presentation of the college's holdings and the current needs and constraints for the museum. The result was an amazing short list of established and upcoming artists. Mendoza's art was prioritized because of the immediate impact it can have on our students in the curriculum and is already having. We've already begun teaching it this semester in various classes using the images that he sent us. So welcome, Hector Dionicio Mendoza. Dionicio, I'm going to call you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. Of course, we wish you were here in person, and that'll happen soon too. My first question for you is actually about acquisitions dedicated to expanding teaching opportunities. Now, you are a professor of art studio. As an artist and teacher, what are your thoughts about your work being held permanently in a teaching museum? That is the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I love the idea of having this idea of creating a space, in this case, a museum, as a learning institution, right? Because it kind of breaks away from the notion that, that we think of as museums being this elitist spaces, white spaces, where only certain people can go and see this really highly valued or expensive works of art. And so the idea of having, the museum at Mount Holyoke be inclusive not only of artworks, but specifically artworks of people of color that represent the community that surrounds Mount Holyoke, I think is really vital and very important. I love that idea also because I'm a professor as well. And like you mentioned, I teach art at CSUMB. And so my art practice is not completely separate from my teaching, right? And the contrary, one kind of feeds on the other one. As a practitioner of art making and specifically sculpture, mixed media sculpture, I try to seek out opportunities, obviously, for my art practice, but then I try to extend those opportunities to my students as well, right? In the form of fellowships or artist in residency programs or internships. So everything kind of works in unison so that my art practice is not separate from how I teach. And of course, I love the idea of utilizing not only my work, but utilizing works of art that speak about specific issues, especially issues that we're dealing with at the moment, to educate, right? To create these spaces for students, and not just students, but in this case, students, but people from the community to engage in dialogue, right? Ultimately, that's the goal. Yeah.
Well, great. I'm just glad the pieces will be here soon and we can share them in person.
Okay.
So we wanted to actually look at one of the pieces, Mariposa, which will be shared on the screen shortly. As mentioned in the introductions, my scholarly work focuses on issues of migration. The mariposa, or butterfly, that people can see here, is a central image and metaphor for migration, but also specifically migrant activism, and even more specifically, undocumented youth activism. They took that on in their fight that led to DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So I wanted to ask you, how were migration issues, how did they function in your conception of Mariposa? Yeah,
so Mariposa, like Mariposa butterfly, started as this like body of work that I began conceptualizing a while back. Usually, there's various types of things that inform my artwork, and they vary depending on the subject matter, depending on like the materials I'm using, depending on various things. It could be something I read in the newspaper or something I'm confronted with in the mass media news, or it could be a conversation that I have with somebody else. Like the idea of the butterfly icon as an icon, has obviously been used, by many artists, but I think is very specific to DACA in that it speaks about, obviously, metaphorically, this idea of the butterfly being a powerful representation of resiliency, renewal, change, endurance, and just existence. I mean, there's another more direct metaphor of butterflies being able to migrate, without borders, right? Without a place to kind of be stopped and sent back. So there's this sense of fluidity for butterflies to be able to go from one area to another. And this specific piece, speaks about butterflies, of course, for like DACA, the DACA students that I work with at the university where I teach, and they have adopted like the monarch butterfly as like their symbol. There's this symbol to represent them. And of course, like the history of that specific butterfly, the monarch butterfly, was really popularized by artist Fabiana Rodriguez, who's an amazing artist, an amazing graphic designer. And she didn't invent the idea, but she completely gave it a face and a graphic to go with it. And that resonates a lot with a lot of the students that I work with, that are DACA students. I also work with foster youth as well, and also I advise a Latino fraternity here on campus. And so I'm very much involved with underrepresented students here on campus. And for me, it's been quite an amazing learning experience to work with those specific groups. Why? Because I've taught for 10 years here at CSUMB, and those groups have been like the most hardworking students that I've had, and I had the pleasure of kind of, doing projects with. They're extremely resilient and they're focused, they're hardworking. And imagine being a young person, member of one of these groups from DACA or foster youth or some of the fraternity kids, and having an opportunity to go to school. They really take that seriously. So a lot of those students, they graduate in 3 years because they have to, right? They have no other opportunity or no other choice but to kind of complete their studies full on as fast as possible. And on top of that, having like a full-time job because they live at home and they have to have certain responsibilities to help their families, right? And then on top of all that, they are, resilient to complete their degrees in 3-4 years. So this specific piece resonates with them because they have attended exhibitions where I've shown this piece here in Monterey, and it really resonates because of all the symbolism behind the work. And I really wanted to use for this specific piece the sense of scale, changing the sense of scale from a small little insect or a small little butterfly to this larger than life piece, a sculpture that is wall hung. And then bringing in all the various sense of materiality that makes up the body of the butterfly in the piece itself. So it's very much in unison with DACA for those reasons, but I think it also resonates more universally based on what the butterfly kind of represents, and immigrants and migrants from all over the world kind of have to deal with similar issues.
Thank you, Dionicio. I think I see a lot of that in the fist, especially, of that piece. The wings of the mariposa are quite stunning, and it's a very large piece. It's big.
Yeah, I believe it's probably like 8 feet by 8 feet or somewhere around.
Yeah, it's stunning. Can you tell us about the materials used to make the wings, but also the floral print on the lower wings, which I think is also right behind you, partially. So what's the significance of these materials and perhaps even the natural environment in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very much interested in like ethnobotany as well, and of course flora and fauna specific to certain areas. My connection with plants in general, or more specifically, has to do with my growing up in Mexico, in the state of Michoacan, in the town of Uruapan. And I used to, one of my first mentors was my grandfather, Dionicio, who I take his name after, Dionicio Mendoza. And he was a really interesting individual in that he used to practice Yoruba tradition, curanderismo. And so I grew up with him. I used to beg my mom to allow me to go visit Tata Nicho, right? And he lived in a tiny little ranch, tiny little town, a few hours away from the small town where we lived, the city of Uruapan. And so for me, that's where I was exposed to this, very specific, religion and a way of life based on Yoruba tradition. Of course, this type of curanderismo was a combination of Yoruba tradition as well as Purepecha ideas of medicine. And so that's where I was exposed to a lot of the ethnobotany and plants that somehow I use now in my own work. And just the idea of having plants kind of heal you and heal the body and the mind was really kind of something that I took with me from working with my Tata Nicho, with my grandfather. Something like that, so that's why you see at the bottom of the mariposa, this specific piece, the butterfly. And so, I had an opportunity to do an artist in residency at the Lucas Artist in Residency program at Villa Montalvo, and I was awarded this fellowship, and I was there, and if you don't know, this place is set in the mountains, in the Saratoga Mountains in California, and it's just beautiful. It's just really lush, and there's this huge mansion that is called Villa Montalvo. And so it has amazing, beautiful gardens. And so I was really inspired by the flora there. And so I started collecting and bringing to my studio all these various types of plants. And originally, I was just interested in the form of each of the various species. And of course, the more I started doing research on not only the plants that were there, and also the history of this amazing big villa, right? And some of the more intense concepts about who owned it and some of the things that happened there, that really informed that body of work. So I started compressing them in books and cardboards and creating this flat pattern, and then I started taking those to my studio and just utilizing spray paint and using those as stencils to create the imprint of this plant species type of pattern. And I like the way it is portrayed just in black and white, because this body work speaks of this idea of white wilderness and who kind of occupies the wilderness, and this idea of also of what is considered wilderness, right? Completely disregarding that before the parks, national parks were there was people that occupied these lands, right? And they were basically tossed out. And then the parks were this pristine idea of wilderness, almost like a Disney, approach, right? But in actuality, historically, places like this, wilderness, having places where people have been lynched, right? Where women have been raped, where LGBTQ people have been, murdered, right? And so my approach to wilderness is a little bit different. It's just a little more critical, and I really kind of try to portray that in my work. So that's why some of the pieces that you see in back of me, they really start almost like a X-ray, right, of something that is a bit more menacing. It's beautiful, right? Because I do want to bring in the audience to kind of at least give me an opportunity to experience and then perhaps read about what this is about. Yeah. And so the butterfly is that's one part of the butterfly, but then also the wings are made with materials that I could find anywhere, right? Like newspaper, cast newspaper, right? Like the wings. So they have this illusion of fragility and ephemera almost, right? And so when you come across a piece and look at it, it almost looks like it's crackling and it's like falling apart in a certain way. And that's because of the way it's treated, right? Of course, it's reinforced in the back, properly to withstand the, passage of time. But I do want the audience to come across this piece that, that is shows the conceptually what it's about. It's about resiliency. It's about moving forward. And so if you see like some of the center of the piece, there's a whole bunch of openings, right? In holes that have been made with like lids and other like found objects. And then like the whole surface of the wings has been treated with this coating of ethnic bread, yeah. And it's this idea that I started working with, and I started researching various types of ethnic breads throughout the world, and trying to find a recipe for all of them, and try to find like the commonalities that bring all these ethnic, quote unquote, ethnic breads to being, right? And so one of the things that I found is that all these ethnic breads have very common basic ingredients, like a certain type of flour, of course, certain salt, water, and then depending on the type of bread, then other ingredients are added. But I think there's a beautiful thing about having that sense of commonality, and I like the idea of this ethnic bread concept because it totally speaks about migration. And when it comes down to like the bare bones of why is it that people migrate from one place to another? Well, sometimes it's just obviously to get a better life from where they are currently at. But it comes down to like the essentials, like just having food, right? In this case, just basic food staples like bread, yeah. And so like the wings I coated with layers of this really thin down recipe. And then with a blowtorch, I cook the ethnic bread straight onto the wings. And so what that happens is like the skin starts to bubble up, and there's some cracking, there's some crawling of the dough or the recipe. And if you look at the really close up of the texture, it becomes extremely textural. One of the things that is amazing about for me to do that process is that when I'm cooking it, like the room smells is pungent of bread being cooked, right? Or almost bread being burned. And so to me that's an important kind of aspect of this piece. And then visually, I think it's kind of interesting, even if you don't know the narrative that I'm giving you, to be able to kind of go and look at the texture and try to figure out what is it, or how was it made, right? That's part of one of the things that interests me as an artist. And then on the top wings, that's probably like one of the only pieces where I've included color, a little bit of color. But for the most part, all the rest of this body of work is just like you see like the material, like the sense of materiality, whether it be cardboard, paper, in this case the spray paint of the leaves. And then the centerpiece of the butterfly is an old piece of wood that I found, that has a hole in the middle, and it also speaks of time and the passage of time, and how certain issues that we are dealing with now have been going on for a long time throughout history. And at the crown of the piece, rather than having a head, it's a fist, right? A fist of Black power, or in this case of DACA and resiliency, in trying to advocate and manifest this need for change, right? It's interesting with like the top piece, which is a fist. It's a ready-made, a found object that I got at a thrift shop, and for me that's interesting in that what happens when you appropriate a ready-made and the way you place it. And so by inverting the fist, it was originally meant for somebody to put their hand in there And actually, if you look at the fist area, this area here has a big hole for you to put a beer, right? For you to go to like a football game, whatever, and put a beer, right? But then taking and inverting it and going with this gesture, it completely changes, right? Completely changes the meaning of the fist, right? And of course, we all know and understand like the history of like that fist, right? And who are some of the underrepresented groups that have used it as a way of not only uniting but saying, enough, or, we're gonna get together and protest, right? It's a sign of protest.
I have another question, but it's still related to migration. Migration is is a lens into our society. You just explained that. And that's why, it's taught, or at least it can be argued that it can be taught in every department and major on our campus and your campus as well, including art. Mm-hmm. When we first viewed your work, Dionicio, we had the opportunity to view a third piece, and we'll show you that shortly, Buscando Futuro, or Finding Future, mm-hmm. From which we had actually borrowed the title for this event. So Finding Future is a gripping 7-foot sculpture of an adult and child in movement, also rich for teaching. And so thank you for sharing this with us. This is one of the ones we were looking at very closely. Mm-hmm. The figure is an instant reminder of migration globally, but in particular, various forms of family migration and various types of families, or what are considered families, from or through Latin America to the United States. So I was wondering if you could tell us about this figure and how, specifically, the border, the U.S.-Mexico border might become part of your work. You mentioned butterflies can transgress the border, but human beings face many barriers, and I think we see some of that here. But can you talk about this?
Yeah, so like I think most of this body of work is figurative in nature, like just like you see in this piece here, and also I think it speaks about migration issues. From of course I'm here in California, so the border from where I'm at, border of Mexico is not too far. But also, I'm also interested in what happens in other borders throughout the world, right? And there's a similar narrative that kind of it happens in all borders, right? I think for this body of work, and specifically this piece, like I mentioned earlier, certain various things, my work is not very linear, in its approach. There's so many things that come into play, and it's kind of layered, both like physically and formally, as well as conceptually. And so for this specific work, one of the things that kind of started me working on it and developing this figure that is carrying, obviously, as a smaller figure, it could be a child, was this photo that I saw one time when I went to get coffee at the local coffee place in Monterey, and there was a newspaper. This was before COVID in 2019, and I came across this newspaper, and I didn't even read like the heading, but in the photograph was of this body of a man with a child, and like next to the man, and the child's top of the body was behind the man's shirt, and they both had drowned. And this was at the Rio Grande and the Mexican-U.S. border. And they were just dead. They were just laying there on the shore of the river. And that was a really kind of impactful image, and if you saw that image, it was in the New York Times, I'm sure it had the same effect on you. And so then I really started thinking about, not thinking of like the things that immigrants and certain communities from all over the world go through, and the conditions that they might be under, that they are willing to sacrifice everything to kind of come across to the other side to get a better life for themselves, and of course a better life for their children, in this case that man's child. And so some of the arguments there could be that, right? Like, well, why would you do that to your own child, right? You know, well, the thing is that they probably live under such awful circumstances where they have no other choice, right? Nobody that is taken care of, that has an opportunity, that has representation, that has a job, that has they feel safe in their own home, their own country, is gonna go anywhere else. They're gonna stay there, right? And so, for me, this piece kind of speaks of that journey and having, bringing, in this case, it was a male, with a father and a child. But of course, women have been doing that all their lives, right? And just, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the journey. I was thinking about like the weight, literally, that, like people, like recently people in Central America, the endurance and like the caravan of people that walked across many, many thousands of miles to get to the border, right? And so that's what this piece kind of, works for me, like utilizing materials like sander black. They are also, kind of specific to labor and cheap labor for that matter, in some of the things that a lot of immigrants do when they get here, right? They're kind of just thrown to do like cheap labor's jobs, and people still complain like, they're here to take our jobs. Well, I don't think most of us that are here that are documented would probably do those kinds of jobs, right? Because those are like the jobs that only immigrants are willing to do because of their status. And so this piece, once again, the materials there are cardboard. I use a lot of cardboard in my own practice because it's inexpensive, because it's you can find it anywhere. I use glue. I use hot glue sticks. I use found objects, and that allows me an opportunity to make artwork anywhere I go in the world. Right, I don't have to bring expensive art materials. As a matter of fact, I probably haven't shopped in an art store for the past 15, 20 years because of once you take a material and you put an art label, artist material label on it, and you package it, then it becomes really expensive, like 3 or 4 times more expensive than what it would be. So my art stores are usually hardware stores or thrift shops or, the dumpster where I find, cardboard. And this piece, like the child's hidden, it becomes part of the backpack that this figure is kind of carrying and kind of moving forward. But it's hidden at the same time. Both the child and the figure are somewhat hidden. In this case, the bigger figure is wearing a hoodie, and of course the hoodie is infused with a long history of oppression and like who wears the hoodie and why is it that they're wearing the hoodie. And so I want to incorporate that within this piece. So you can see some of the same pattern that I use in my 2D drawings with the plants, on the one leg, the right leg of the figure. Did that answer your question, David?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Next, I want to talk about the second piece that we acquired, which is Immigrant Shoes, and which we'll see shortly, but the huaraches or sandals attached to the blades of an ice skater, a pair of ice skates.
Yeah.
And so I have to say, Dionicio, what I like about your work is not that it is a form of art that migrates south to north, but instead it's exemplary of cultural forms that are recreated here in the United States, that because of migration. Mm-hmm. And so like all the pieces we've seen, they're both fragile and strong, light, but also weighted. And as such, for me, they represent the complexities of the migrant journey, but also they're an absolute product of those movements themselves. And so that's the kind of stuff I think that I get to bring to my students when showing your work. But Immigrant Shoes has quite a backstory on how you started making huaraches in Los Angeles. I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, huarache sandals, right, are very specific to Mexico, right? Of course, there's a whole bunch of different types of sandals, throughout the world that people manually make. But huaraches are very specific to to Mexico. But even more so, the state of Michoacan, where I'm from, and the state of Michoacan is a southwestern part of Mexico. There's a town called Saguayo, and they're like the originators of the huarache, as we know it. And people can argue and say otherwise, and that's fine. But they feel like they were the ones that basically invented the huarache. And so huarache, the word of huarache, actually the root word is huarachi, which is a Purepecha. The Purepecha peoples are the people that were there before the Spanish came and colonized, and they're in that region of Mexico, in the state of Michoacan. So it's a Purepecha word that means literally like food basket, right? Because early huaraches were made with fibers from roots, et cetera, et cetera. They were not leather, right? We move forward to like the 1930s. That's when they started using tires as the sole of this type of footwear. And so if you think about like recycling, they were one of the first recyclers, right, back in the 1930s, where they were utilizing leather straps that were usually like thrown away or use leather scraps from different tanneries or different places where they used to make purses or other more valuable objects, and they would reclaim those, and then they started figuring out that they would put a rubber sole made of car tires, right? And that's like the huarache that I kind of knew about and grew up with when I was in Mexico. The huarache itself also has a very important direct connection with me, in that I grew up at downtown Uruapan, and there was a huarache maker that worked in a building next to where we lived. And so I'm very familiar with like the smell of leather and like the rubber smell when they were cutting it. And so move forward to probably like 8-9 years ago, I have a friend, Pilar Agüero. She's also an amazing California artist, and her and a few other people that we kind of all get together. And we came, after I'd been in New Haven, Connecticut at Yale, I came back to Oakland, and then I went to San Jose. And we met up. It was like a chance encounter. We met up, I think, in a fabric store. And we were talking, and she was telling me I was asking her about her family, and she mentioned that her dad was a huarache maker. And I was like, wow, that sounds really interesting, because, I love like the idea of huarache making and all that. But what's interesting about that was that her dad had been making huaraches in South Central LA probably for the past 15, 20 years. And it was because of him and his wife had been making huaraches in this tiny little shop. And because of those huaraches, they put all their kids through college making huaraches. And so I was really inspired. And so at the time, there was a big art fair in San Jose that was called 01. And so we applied for a grant to do an artist in residence with her dad in South Central. And so we went to South Central, and we kind of bombed, like his little shop, and said, we have some money they can give you, and we want to learn from you. We want you to teach us how to weave huaraches, right, and how to make them. And he saw us kind of like really weird, like, why would you do that? You're like going to college, you have an education. And like, well, no, this is really important. It's really important that you pass on this knowledge, of course, to your kids, but hopefully to other people, so that we can continue this tradition. And so that was our residency that we did. And so this Immigrant Shoes that you see that is going to be part of the collection is one of the huaraches that I designed using the knowledge that I learned at that residency in South Central. And of course, Pilar Agüero also made some wonderful, huaraches. Her huaraches were more utilitarian. You could actually wear them. Mine were more sculptural in nature. It was a really interesting experience, because then you really kind of taking, like you said, objects that are this case, they're not both ready-made because I made the huaraches myself, but like the blade, for example, and kind of combining these two approaches, these two different cultures. And, you know, I kind of was thinking about immigrants once again and metaphorically how they have to maneuver to so many different layers once they're here or once they cross the border, which is a really difficult task in itself. Once they get here, they have to maneuver. And so by putting these like really foreign, you know, objects, they also speak about weather changes, right? From people from the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico or the Caribbean islands that maybe go to New York. I know for me, when I first came from a really warm area, which is Michoacán, Mexico, and came to the US, and I was really freezing. Or even when I went to Yale and then I got my first snowstorm, I was like, what? This is crazy. This is really intense, right? And so it speaks about that. It speaks about being at a specific place in a specific time with totally different challenges, right? Bringing some of the things that you can know and understand and things that are completely foreign. So for me, you know, that series and that specific piece, you know, it speaks about the challenges that immigrants kind of go through by juxtaposing these two kind of different foreign things together.
Thank you, Dionicio. I think we have one more image of these. Just as we move forward, we could see. Yeah, you can see the other kind.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So that was. I mean, I made like a whole bunch of different takes on utilizing like very specific weaving patterns. And the beautiful thing about huaraches is that there's like over 100 and something, or even more so, weaving patterns, you know, for making these handmade huaraches, right? And, you know, I grew up like in the 80s, 90s, so, you know, I listened to punk and heavy metal, and so, you know, I wanted to combine like these two ideas, you know, about, you know, some of the music that I used to listen back when I was like a teenager. And so I wanted to make, you know, also these huaraches that were not, could be both for male and female, right? And just kind of push the boundaries of like the weaving and like the loaded, you know, history of like the traditional huarache into something more contemporary.
Yeah, they're amazing. The shoes are gonna resonate with our students, who, especially the Latinx students who come from, you know, some are from here, but others come from, myself included, come from warmer climates and then adjust to the Northeast, especially Caribbean peoples from all over coming here and making this their home and being the dominant group here. So I think we wanted to allow some questions from our viewers as well. So Isabel Garcia, the graduate assistant for residential community and inclusion, will present some of the questions to you, Dionicio. And if there is time, I have a couple more things to ask you. So
Great.
Thank you, Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing me, David. So far, we have 2 questions about mariposa specifically. Yes. So for instance, what is the scale of mariposa and why are there holes in the wings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so once again, you know, for me, transforming something that is small, right, as we know and understand, and it's even some of the bigger species of mariposas or even moths, you know, that are probably like 12 inches, as big as they get, and transforming something that is a little smaller and more fragile and making it large, you know, was a really important thing for me. Not only to have presence, like I said, like this piece of mariposa, as you see it, is probably like 8 feet by 8 feet. So when you're standing next to it, you feel somewhat not intimidated, but it's overwhelming to see something of that magnitude that kind of overtakes you, that is bigger than the actual small little insect, the small little butterfly. And like the surface is treated so that, you know, the holes are there as a way of showing resilience. You know, like this, if this was alive, right, it probably shows that it has been through a lot, right? That it has withstood like a lot of experiences, weather, you know, it shows endurance, it shows, resilience.
Great. Isabel, do we have another question?
Thank you for the question. That was a great question.
Yeah, yes, we do. So this is another question regarding mariposa as well.
Yeah.
Have you created other mariposa sculptures, and what are they like?
Yeah, really great question. Yes, absolutely. So basically, this mariposa is probably like, medium size. I'm currently working on a couple other mariposas that are probably like 3 feet bigger. So they're probably like 10 feet by 12 feet. Um, and then I also have a series of smaller mariposas that are probably like, I think they're 30 inches by 30 inches. Yeah. So like 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. Yeah. And the way they're treated, they're different in that, they bring, some of them have like the pattern that you see in back of me all over the mariposa, right? All over the butterfly. Some have the bottom wings with cover mostly like what you see in the back, the pattern of the leaves in the back. Some are just full on, ethnic bread, right? That has been really burned and cooked and layered, and so they look a lot more fragile and a lot more textural. Mm-hmm.
So interesting. And come back, Isabel, another question, please.
Yes, so one question says, what is your favorite material?
Mm-hmm.
But also, is there a special meaning behind the color at the top of the mariposa?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And this person mentioned, I know you mentioned it is one of the few works to which you added color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very observant. So for the most of the work is like I said, it shows like the color of the material, like browns of the cardboard. Some have earth, some have like other organic, roots or bark. But for like the butterfly, the mariposa series, that's probably, there's only a couple, two more that are smaller that have a little bit of color, because I didn't want to overwhelm like the surface with like specific color. But the one that that you showed, that was like one of the first ones that I made, and I did want to include some sense of a color, and it also is like the various types of color that I utilize, the palette. It speaks of diversity, right? Of different groups, right? That are represented.
Great. It seems like we have a lot of questions from the audience, so
I love it.
Please come back.
Great questions.
Yes, we have many of them. So one other question is, could you talk about the colors in the second piece,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of pattern is on the leg?
Oh yeah. So like the color, the figure, the figure piece that you saw, like the colors there are very earthy, right? Because once again, they're like the actual materials, the like the color of the material. I didn't use any other color. The only color that you see there is black, which is the pattern on the leg. So everything that you see there is like the cardboard that that I kind of sculpted and made it malleable to create like the shape of the form and the figure. But if you see like the feet of the child, for example, and the hoodie, those are, and the backpack, that's earth, that's tierra that I kind of gather from like the fields, because I'm from a large agricultural community here in Monterey, in the Salinas Valley. Right, this is the lettuce bowl here in California that basically sends out food throughout the world. Like a lot of vegetables are picked here, and so that's earth from the fields that has been glued onto like the backpack, to the hoodie, to the child's feet. And so that's the color that you see. It's just like this ochre brown tone to it. And like the body is just the color of various types of cardboards. Some cardboards, depending on where the cardboard was made, is either a little bit grayish brown, it has a grayish brown tonality, or maybe it's a little bit darker. And so like the leg itself is just, a piece of found plywood. I think it's 3/4 of an inch thick, that I cut out a pattern, and with a saw I cut out the shape of the leg. And so like the outside that you see with a pattern is the only side that is treated, and everything that you see a lighter tone, that has been masked, right? So even the lines that you see there, that masked using tape to create this sense of movement. And if you look at the other side of the leg, it's just the raw wood. You see the actual material.
Isabel, do we have another question?
Yes. One of them says, I loved how you included bread in the piece of the mariposa. Have you included other pieces of food in your other sculptures or artworks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, the thing with food in general, right? Food is really about memory for me, right? And I think for all of us, whenever we go to a place, even if it's a foreign place, and we smell like a scent of something that we're familiar with, it really takes us to that specific place, right? And it could be comfort food, it could be, any other type of food. But there's something wonderful about scent and food in general that really kind of takes us to a time and place. I do want to add that I haven't used any other types of food, but I do want to add that like the recipe for the ethnic bread concept that I use in Mariposa includes, for example, recipes or basic elements of like naan, right, from Central and South Asia, right? Arepa from Venezuela, chapati from India, matzah bread from Israel, and lavash bread from Turkey and Iran, right? And of course, tortilla, right? And so all these places, at some point or another, they've dealt with immigration issues or people moving from that homeland somewhere else, right? Like currently Turkey, even like arepa from Venezuela, right? So they're very specific, thought out, so that they layer. See, like I mentioned earlier, the work is about layers, and that's just another layer to kind of. What's interesting about that for me is that, like, for the most time, I'm not gonna be there to tell you the narrative, right? And that's okay, that even if you don't know the narrative. But I think if you do decide to find out more about the work and it is of interest, then that will kind of help you navigate like the work and stay with it a little longer and create dialogue.
I think that's great, Dionicio. I think one of the things that we all as faculty appreciated about your work were those layers. And we instantly, from different vantage points, from different disciplines, started talking about those various layers that we saw, and we had these wonderful conversations about you and the other artists that we examined. So it was wonderful. I think we have time, Isabel, for one more question, and then we'll see where we're at.
Yes.
Great.
So you spoke about memories. So I believe this question is relevant to that. Can you speak more about how your interest in ethnobotany and childhood experiences with your grandfather influenced your art?
Yeah, absolutely. I really value those experiences that I had. I value mentorship in general. I think, mentorship is something that is so important. And I invite all the students that are listening to really kind of consider mentorship. There's many ways of going about it and getting a mentor, asking for a mentor. But my grandfather was one of my first mentors. And so he didn't say much. He was kind of very stoic, kind of quiet. But the few times that I really got a chance to go to his the place where where he lived, right, and but specifically hang out in like the little shack, because it was a tiny little shack made out of mud and sticks, and and I used to hang out with him. It was really amazing and really transform and inform, I think my practice now, because, he had like the floor of the little shack where he used to practice was made out of dirt, right? And he would throw water on the floor to kind of make the dust kind of dissipate. And so when he used to do that, the ground smelled like earth. It had like this wonderful pungent smell. We were talking about smells earlier. So I used to lay down on the floor and look up at the ceiling. And the ceiling was completely covered from side to side with bottles with different concoctions, right? With different medicinal concoctions and herbs and alcohol, and there was also some dried up animals, that he used for his rituals. And he also had some masks, some ritualistic masks that he used as well. And although I was really young and he used to scare the heck out of me, like some of the imagery, I was fascinated. I was really fascinated by being exposed to all this installation, really, of all these herbs and all these animals and like the smells. And so, when he passed away, he left a little box, and inside the box he left 2 journals. One of them had like his botanical notings with different recipes, and another one was a little book on rituals, which is very specific. And so every year for my birthday, I go and read 1 page, right? I read 1 page, and that's my gift. It's a way of honoring him. But one of the things that he also left me were 2 or 3 ritual masks. Yeah, they really don't have any meaning for anybody, but they're very meaningful for me. But the interesting thing about that was that, see, the practice that he had was meant to be passed from grandfather to son to et cetera, right? But none of his kids wanted to learn his practice. Why? Because they wanted to come to El Norte. They wanted to make money. They didn't want to get paid with chickens or goats. You know what I mean? So they didn't value it, right? And I wish I would have been a little older to kind of learn from him and maybe become like a curandero myself, right? But I think in my own way, I by no means am I a curandero, right? But I do value all those things, especially herbal medicine, alternative medicines. Yeah.
Thank you, Dionicio. These questions are so great. I'm told we get a bonus question. So, Isabel, can we have another?
Yes. So this is actually very relevant to what is happening right now. How is COVID, so the impact, sacrifices, isolation, deaths, etc., have affected your work and your teaching?
Absolutely. Great question. This global pandemic has really affected all of us, and I think it's brought, like the best and the worst of humanity all around the globe, really. There's always never been a sense of equilibrium, obviously, but now it feels like the scales are tipped more to one side, and like a lot of people are getting laid off. I'm very privileged that I still have my job, that I have a place to live, that I have food, and I have a great partner. But there's a lot of people that are not in that situation, and the frustrating thing is that the wealthier get wealthier, even in these times of COVID, right? There's industries that are making a lot of money. Ask Jeff Bezos and Amazon, right? And so for me, it has given me an opportunity to, not that I didn't before, but to really reflect on what matters. And so, I think environmental racism is really kind of hitting us in our face based on like the inequalities of healthcare, for example, for underrepresented communities, and things that have been magnified in terms of systemic inequalities. But for me as an artist, it gave me a space to really, like for the summer, for example, it started happening mid-semester, last semester. And so we had to go home and we had to quarantine and all that. And so it really gave me an opportunity to be really productive because I had no other choice. I was stuck in my garage. Yeah. And so I started, really, once again, going and trying to gather cardboard and just basic materials. And what's interesting about that is that I'm very blessed and privileged to have like this really great studio in the university. And now I find myself working in the garage, right? Not a big deal. But I was working with really large pieces before we had to go home. And so I continued working with large pieces in my garage. And that was a challenge to kind of fit something that is 16 feet in a one-car garage. So you have to maneuver, but I think artists are inventive and they're resourceful, and we improvise all the time, yeah. And so that's what I tell my students. You know, part of going back to teaching this semester is you know, I don't see it as like, wow, it's a really crazy challenge. I don't want to do it. It's Zoom fatigue, which is true, right? But I see it as a challenge, right? Because it really kind of brings things down to the essence. And for artists, you know, you have to work wherever you can, right? Not all of us can afford really expensive lofts in New York City or San Francisco. So we can make work anywhere. We can make work in our kitchen table. And then I speak to them about artists like Felix Gonzalez Torres, for example, from Cuba. And his studio was a telephone, right? He would pick up the phone and he would ask someone to build his work, right? That's a way of kind of making a studio. Or Ana Mendieta, they use the environment, right, as a studio. Or my friend Meridian from Cuba that uses flies, right, to make little sculptures. So I tell my students there's never an excuse not to make artwork, right? And there's never this idea that I don't have money to buy materials. You know, there's materials everywhere, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Dionicio. We're about to end, so I wanted to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to share or add before we finish up?
Yeah, you know, I just want to, you know, thank Mo Holyoke and the museum. I also want to thank you and everyone that was involved with this project. I think projects like these are really important, not just because I was included, but I think you know, bringing in artists to be represented in spaces like this one is vital. And I think as an artist that, you know, grew up with, you know, like Yoruba tradition, there's a thing called ashe, right? In Yoruba tradition, there's a thing called ashe, and it's not an abundance, it's basically a blessing. So when you're blessed with ashe, like in this case I was, that means that some ashe was taken from somebody else. So it is important to kind of recognize that you know, maybe other artists, you know, they could have had the opportunity, didn't have it. And so understanding that, you know, I want to, you know, kind of commend the museum, but also hopefully this won't stop and then there'll be opportunities for other artists as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dionicio. So this concludes our dialogo with artist Hector Dionicio Mendoza. I encourage the audience, invite Dionicio to your campus. There is another event on Friday that's focused just on the Mount Holyoke community for students. So Dionicio will be in conversation with them. And thank you for coming, Dionicio. Thank you, Isabel, for the questions, and the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum for its support. And thank you to all the members. And one more thing, go ahead, Dionicio.
One more thing, you know, if you're engaged with my practice and you want to know more about my practice, you can always follow me on Instagram, right? I actually barely started an Instagram account. I only have like 30 posts. But if you want to see more of my sculptures, definitely, I'm there. And it's Hector Dionicio Mendoza.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone in the audience for being here. And your questions were excellent.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.